Hi everyone. First of all, I need to apologise because this video is going to be somewhat of a rant. So if you're not in the mood to hear me ranting, please feel free to click away right now. I was prompted to make this video because there seems to have recently been a rash of this kind of post popping up on my Facebook newsfeed. Now, if you're on Facebook yourself, you've probably seen loads of these. You may even have reposted or shared them yourself. Now, I am sure that the majority of people who create these memes and post them, repost them, share them, do so with the very best of intentions and are completely well-meaning. I'm also pretty sure that most of them have no clue what they're talking about. Because as a cancer survivor myself, I have to say I find these kind of things patronising and condescending and just plain wrong. Now, there are those patients out there who are diagnosed with cancer and they have an operation to remove it. They may then have to follow up with chemo and radiotherapy, and they're going to feel pretty rubbish for a while, but after that's done, they carry on with their lives and everything is great. They may be followed up for the next 5 or 10 years just to make sure there's no recurrence, but other than that, their lives continue pretty much as normal. But for many cancer patients, including me, beating cancer is not the end of the story. It is in fact only the beginning. I had 10 years of follow-up after my operation to remove the cancer, and I was discharged from my oncology department 3.5 years ago. And yet, 13.5 years later, I am still going up to the Royal Marsden once every 3 to 6 months. Because I am suffering a direct result of the treatment of cancer. The side effects and long-term effects of cancer treatment can be mental, emotional, physical, or in many cases, all of the above. In many instances, there is no cure for the conditions that are left behind, only management, which certainly in the case of lymphedema is hit and miss at best. Because of the nature of lymphedema, there is no pattern to it. What works for me on a Monday morning might not work on a Thursday afternoon, and what works for me extremely well might not work for somebody else at all. It makes it extremely difficult to manage, and I do manage it. And I thought I would share with you one day in the life of a lower limb lymphedema sufferer. Here goes. I was wearing these when I came to bed last night, but obviously at some point, probably the early hours of this morning, they got too hot or too uncomfortable and I've ripped them off, hence they're now in a pile on the floor. This is my bad leg. Now, to be honest, when you see it in isolation, it doesn't actually look that bad. You could be forgiven for thinking there's nothing wrong with it, until you put it next to my good leg, when you can clearly see the difference in sizes. It's actually looking pretty good at the moment because I'm still lying flat, but the minute I stand up, gravity will do its work and my leg will start to swell. So before I even get out of bed, it's back on with the wraps. So I have been lazy this morning and I've got up and come downstairs to make myself a cup of tea without first having put any compression on. And I don't know if you can make out, but there is already a mark here. This is the edge of my slippers. And this is where my foot has already started to swell. I've literally come down 2 flights of stairs and made a cup of tea, and the swelling has started already. So best I get some compression on this as soon as possible, really. Having turned the stocking almost all the way inside out, I put the foot piece over my foot. I then ease the rest of the stocking over my foot and ankle onto my lower leg. Now comes the fun part. I've got to ease the stocking up the rest of my leg, making sure that the compression is as even as possible all the way up. This involves a great deal of roll it down and pull it up again and adjusting and heaving, as you can see. When I first pulled the stocking on over my foot, it sat in a little band around the bottom of my calf muscles, and as you can see now, the stocking is sitting in that point, and if I don't readjust it, it will create a pocket in my calf muscle which will give me a really peculiar shape. So roll the whole thing down and start again. So that's my stocking on. Now to get dressed, put on some shoes and off to work. And I will check in with you later in the day. It's about 3:30 in the afternoon. I've had a full morning at work and I've done 2 hours tap dancing. And this is just to show you where my right leg is by this time of the day. It's now 10 o'clock. Compression has been on for nigh on 16 hours. And as you can see, my ankle is considerably bigger than it was this morning. Leg washed, dried, moisturised and in the wraps. 2 pieces. This part here is the foot and ankle piece, and from here it's the lower leg piece. Let's see how long I manage to wear this tonight before it gets ripped off because it's too hot or too uncomfortable. If I'm feeling particularly lazy and I know that I won't be going out anywhere, I'm just going to be slobbing around at home, rather than put on a compression stocking, I will add a thigh piece and a knee piece to my wraps, and I'll end up looking something like this. So that's me on an average day. Actually, that was a pretty good day. There are days when my leg is much bigger and it's much worse and it's much more difficult to manage. I had been wearing the same style, shape and size of compression stockings for 5 or 6 years, and then all of a sudden the manufacturer decided to change the way they wove them. And out of the blue, the stockings that I've been wearing for years were no good for me anymore. They didn't fit me properly. And I then had to start the process again of trying to find something that was suitable, that would fit, that was relatively comfortable and would actually do the job. Now, unfortunately, one of the pairs of stockings that I tried pushed my leg into a really odd shape, and I ended up with compartmentalization of the lymphedema. And no matter what I did and no matter what alternative stockings I wore, I was left with this leg, lower leg, that looked like a fat stick with a balloon on the top. The only way to get this sorted out was for me to undergo 2 weeks of specialist compression bandaging, which left me looking like this. The bandages could not be changed, I could not take them off, I could not adjust them. They were put on and the only way to get them off again was to have them cut off. So my bandages were changed every 3 to 4 days. Obviously, there's a great deal of restriction on my movement. Walking was difficult, driving was difficult, dancing was practically impossible. Luckily, I was actually scheduled to have it for 3 weeks. I ended up only having it for 10 days. But should something arise again, like a bout of cellulitis or something like that, I'd have to go back into this bandaging. There are those days when, for whatever reason, mostly just because there's an A in the day, my leg is much bigger than usual. And on these days, I have to go into a higher class of compression, a class 4. And I can't actually get them on by myself. I have to have help from hubby. It involves me sticking my foot up on a step and wedging my bum into his hips so that he can literally heave the stocking up my leg. Once it's on, the compression affects the mobility around my knee and my ankle. So again, walking is impinged and driving is impinged and dancing is impinged. It affects my everyday life. There are things that you take for granted that I have to think about. I cannot walk around my own home barefooted, just in case I happen to have dropped something that might cut my foot. The cut may then become infected, which will end up with me having a dose of cellulitis. I did have a very bad dose of cellulitis about 6 years ago, and it took 5 years for my leg to properly recover before it started coming down in size. I constantly have a supply of antibiotics in the house, just in case I do happen to cut myself shaving or something like that. I immediately have to go on to 2 weeks of high dose antibiotics, and which in people like me can play havoc with your digestive system. It gets most uncomfortable. I'm a bit of an old softie and a bit of a romantic, and whilst I don't like the sun, I do enjoy a moonlit stroll down the beach with my other half. Well, I can't do that because I can't go barefooted anywhere. If you have seen my Goth Pikes videos, you will know that I have terrible trouble finding shoes and boots to fit me. Things that people take for granted, I have to think that much more about. I am unable to remain in any one position for any length of time, and as a result of that, it means that my driving is considerably restricted to about 2 hours a day. And that's not 2 hours each way, that's 2 hours total. A couple of years ago, I thought I would give it a try because my leg was much better. So I drove down to Rochester. It's an hour and a half. I spent the day wandering around, you know, not particularly heavy exercise, just wandering around. I then had to drive home, and within 5 minutes back in the car, my leg was already complaining, and I suffered for it for about the next 3 days. Not being able to stay in the same position means that I have had to give up my beloved motorcycle, because I can't ride for more than about an hour out in order to then have an hour's ride back, which is kind of pointless. My motorbike was my escape, it was my freedom. I'd be out on that thing for hours at a time. I can't do that now, and that's one of the things that's hurt the most, actually. Of all the things that the cancer has taken from me, my motorbike is the one that cuts the deepest. And I have had people say to me, again, very well-meaning, good-intentioned people, say to me, well, at least you're still alive. Well, yes, I am still alive, and yes, I have a good life. But there are those days, 6 o'clock in the morning, when my leg is already hot and sweaty and swollen, where I'm crying in frustration because I can't get my stocking on. Even now, there are still those days where I wish I hadn't made it, where it's just too hard. I'm not alone in this, and I know from my nurse specialists at the Royal Marsden that there are lots of other patients who, like me, sometimes feel that the conditions and the scars that we have been left as a result of our cancer treatment is actually worse than the cancer or the treatment was itself. Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't donate to the cancer research funds, and I'm not suggesting that you don't share your support for cancer victims on Facebook. I'm just asking you to remember those things that the Cancer Research Campaign ads don't tell you. Before you go blindly and unthinkingly passing on that post, that meme, just try to remember, please, that for most of us beating cancer is not the be-all and end-all. Yes, we want to live, but we also want to have a life worth living afterwards. I'm sorry if this particular video has been a bit negative and a bit down. Hopefully the next one will be a little more uplifting. Until then, take care. Bye.